Hey there. So I have been working a lot lately on these darker, more sort of synthetic and industrial soundscapes, landscapes. And in the process, I've refined some of my workflow with regards to how I bounce out stems for these projects. And that's suiting me for a couple of reasons. One is it's helping me a lot with my archiving. If I want to, when I'm done with a project and I want to store something, and I know I've got like a burned tight copy that is protected, it's just a file or a set of files I have to keep. Archiving is one reason why I do this. Another reason, and a major reason, is that I need to collaborate with other people, whether they're filmmakers or other music producers, and I need to be able to exchange files with them that represent what I've created in a way that I know that it's not going to be misunderstood. I'll give you an example that if I send them a Cubase file, maybe they don't have a plugin that I use, maybe that's not immediately apparent, and they listen to it and they're like, yeah, it doesn't sound good. But that's because, there wasn't a reverb on there, or I didn't have a filter running correctly, or, they didn't have that filter plug-in. So the sound of my instruments is totally different than what I intended. If I burn stuff out into stems, then they're getting audio files that are absolutely definitely what I envisioned. And it just chills me out to know that whoever I'm sharing these files with, they're getting the representation of what I intended. So I'm going to demonstrate how this works because it actually is something that I've invested a lot of time in the last couple of weeks. But it's definitely working out for me. I feel like I've got it. Maybe a week ago it was half baked. Now it's really fully cooked. This recipe is a good recipe. I can say with assurance that it would really help out people who are doing the work I'm doing and are working in Cubase. Although I'm sure, in fact, I know that if you're working in Ableton or you're working in Logic, that you can achieve exactly the same outcome that I've got here. And a lot of producers, a lot of composers are already essentially doing this. It's not that I wouldn't want to represent that, I've had some brainstorm here that no one's thought of before. However, I have made a lot of efforts to learn what other people do. I've seen what other producers do, and I've tried to improve on it. And what I've got here, I consider much more lightweight and a much tighter workflow for me. I hope that it would work for anybody watching this as well. So if you're not using Cubase, don't freak out. The principles here are the same. So why I like this so much, why I like this approach, and the reason I think you'd probably benefit from it, is that it allows me to do two things that are essential in my line of work. One is to maximize my creativity when I'm in the composing, writing phase of a project where I want to completely get away from the hassles of technology, bit rates, and protocols and routing. I don't want to be thinking technical. I want to be thinking mood, creative. I want to be playing instruments. I want to be expressive. That's one phase. Then, of course, there is the concrete must-do phase at the end, which is I've got something to produce, I've produced, but I need to share it. I need to get it into that final product that somebody can use. And historically, for me, that was like another phase of work, almost like mixing is just another phase of work. But this workflow with this template makes it so that it's a breeze when I need to spit out this audio and get it to people. Now, why would I use this approach with stems specifically? And stems, I'm using it as a loose term here. Stems traditionally would represent not exactly what I'm doing here, because let's say you took a rock band and you've got 10 mics on the drum kit, and you've got maybe 2 mics on the guitars, things like that. You'd actually aggregate all those 10 mics and make a drum track, and then you'd make a guitar track. You wouldn't send somebody every single mic that you set up or every single input you set up, because it'd be overwhelming. And the idea was, if you want to bring down the drums, you can. If you want to bring up the guitar, you can. So it's flexible enough that you could separate the instruments. What I'm doing here is actually much, much more flexible in that, and that's because I'm working with sounds that don't always go together like all the drums in a drum kit naturally go together. There's no really good reason to separate them out. But with what I'm doing here, I've got bass lines, I've got pads, I've got drones, I've got leads. A lot of this is highly synthetic. So it doesn't really make sense for me to aggregate like all the synthesizers together because everything's synthesized. So I'm actually creating many more parts, and you'll see how this works out in a few minutes. So what I've got behind me here is a Cubase project, and I'll kind of just explain a little bit what's going on here. So I've got this instance of Machine here, and my instance of Machine, I'll load it up. Where is it there? Sorry, sometimes I have to squint a little bit because I'm looking at a really big screen. Let me pull it over here so you guys can see what I'm looking at. All right, so I got Machine running in a VST, and this probably won't surprise anybody who's watched my other videos because I work a lot with this integration with Machine. I won't get into that a lot, but I love Machine and I love Cubase, and I don't have to choose between them, so I don't. I use Machine inside Cubase. And so I've got these different groups, all right? And I'm not going to go into how Machine works. I'm just telling you that basically this structure here is the components of my composition, and they're structured here in a way that Cubase can access them. However, some of these routings within Machine are layering instruments together. Others are just having parameters like cutoff in a filter, for example, change over time. So there's kind of a lot going on in Machine, and I like it that way. I like the flexibility in the creative phase that gives me, but in the past, it could become a bit of a headache if I've got, well, this is layered. Should I spit out the two layers separately? But how do I convey to my colleague, how I want them mixed? If I mix them together, is that going to rob them of editing flexibility that they need, so on and so forth? So this approach helps to deal with that. So I've got Machine here, and I've got it actually set up to route out to different outputs within Machine. Now, whether you're using Machine or not isn't really that important. Just like it's not essential that you use Cubase, but it's essentially the same idea. I've got this VST, I've got this virtual instrument, and over here I have enabled these different outputs, and each of those outputs, each of those white dots, represents one of these purple tracks down here and one of these gray tracks. These are the same thing. So here I have Machine leads. Here I have it just, well, let's look, I had to rename leads actually. But here I've got impacts, here I've got impacts. So this is like the actual output from Machine, and I've got it routed to this group track. And I do that because I like to have color coding, and it's very easy for me to see. All my group tracks are always purple, but they're essentially the same thing. So if I go ahead and I play this, we can see the various sounds coming through these tracks, and these represent sounds that are inside Machine coming out of these groups. So you can see like my faders here, you can really see those impacts in yellow, and you'll see here under impacts that every now and then this little meter here really bounces, really spikes up because there's an impact, right? So you can see for yourself how this is all being routed. And what this does for me in terms of collaborating is when it's time for me to bounce stuff out, I can just go here to export, and let me bring that window over from my main monitor so you can see what I got going on here. Again, if you're not a Cubase user, no sweat. I'm sure that you have essentially the same options in whatever DAW you have. I have Cubase Pro, which allows me to do multiple exports at once, right? So I can say, I just want these stems. I want my machine leads group. I want my impacts group, my loops group, so on and so forth. They're going to be bounced out independently to independent audio files that then I will share. Now, I didn't really touch on one of the important things that is in the title of this video, which is the host automation aspect. And that's because in this particular composition, I'm not actually composing with notes, melody, harmony, and rhythm. I'm composing with parameters. So cutoff frequencies, resonance, things like that, that I'm changing over time. And you can see here, all of these tracks, these all represent automation. And you can see the automation if I take myself off the picture there. You can see the automation curves here that are creating these kind of swells and cadences, but they're not traditional music in terms of harmony and melody and rhythm. They are these parameter changes. And I really need to make sure that this host automation is baked into my stem. So this automation I like to write in Cubase. I could write it in Machine, but for various reasons I don't want to get into, I don't actually want to do that. I've done it and it doesn't work as well as this. I can still play my Machine knobs, so it's a very tactile, experiential part of composing for me, but it's recorded into Cubase as these automation lanes, host automation lanes. These automation lanes feed back into Machine, where they affect the parameters within Machine before they come out these outputs and eventually out of these groups. And so when I do my export here, and I've got these group tracks selected for export, my automation, my host automation in Cubase got routed through Machine, and now it's baked into my stem. So all I have to do is just go ahead and hit export, and I'm done. I get audio files. Let me see if I've got a window with some of these audio files in it. Yeah, so this is pretty much what I get here. Super simple. This piece I called Haunted Origins. I put some naming in there to tell me what kind of bit rate and sampling rate these are at. And I can tell, you know, these are my leads, these are my impacts, loops, bass, so on. That the audio just got spit out. It's separated for my collaborators to remix if they need to. A case where they might want to do that is a filmmaker, let's say, they get my music and they need to work in some Foley, or something in my audio is too high frequency and it's conflicting with dialogue, they need to dial it back. But if I just gave them one stereo file of my whole mix, well, they have to come back to me, and that's kind of a bottleneck for them. And I don't want to have to do the extra work. I want them to have flexibility, and they want to have the flexibility. So this gets me there. These are not exactly stems because there's a lot of them, but they do give the editor and the director, producer, total flexibility. So when would I use this? I would use this pretty much every project that I do. This is exactly how I work. If I'm working on an orchestral piece, well then I've got groups, those purple tracks down the bottom. I've got groups that represent my strings or my wind instruments or my percussion, right, or my brass. If I'm doing something that's like rock and roll, then I have groups that represent the drums and the guitars and the bass and the vocals and the backing vocals. So it's the same thing where I want to have two phases of the project, but have them integrated. The first phase is I'm highly creative, I'm just in the flow, I'm vibing off of what's happening, and I'm creating. The second aspect that this template supports is I just spit out these stems, these very narrow representations of specific instruments or instrument groups that can then be mixed very flexibly in any production environment. They're in a universal format, like a WAV file. So I would use it no matter what I'm doing. It's just really well suited here Also, because it allows me to do any of this automation. I could do MIDI automation if I wanted. I could do host automation. This works with Contact. It works, of course, with Machine. Sometimes I'm bringing in MIDI that I wrote in Dorico or Sibelius or something like that. It just works, whatever, because Cubase does the heavy lifting of bringing together the automation, the mixing, the effects, MIDI with audio, warping, all of those advanced features that just about any modern DAW supports. Cubase brings all that under one hood, and this infrastructure of using group tracks and multiple outputs on a VST enables me to ensure that as I'm creating, I don't have to think about routing. It's just done for me, and at the end, I spit out these files, and I'm all done. So if you have any questions on this, please post in the comments. Thank you so much for watching. Please like and subscribe because it really helps me get these videos surfaced. And I would love to hear some comments or questions specifically on things you might want me to elaborate on or cover in future streams. And I am wrapping it up for this week, but I'll be back next week. So thanks a lot for watching, and good luck with your music making. I will see you next time.